I'd like to welcome everyone to the second community workshop for downtown Markdale, the community visioning exercise. We are really looking forward to this conversation. We're going to share what we've heard over the last little while through the online survey and a summary of what we heard at the last round of workshops, and look forward to another terrific conversation with all of you on the call. My name's Donna Hind. I'm a partner at the Planning Partnership, and on the meeting is also my business partner Ying DeGiorgio, who's going to wave her hand so everybody can see her on the screen, and together Ying and I will be walking everybody through the presentation today. So we'll go to the next slide, which sets out a diagram of the work program. So the circles and squares are the various tasks in the 3-phase exercise that we've been underway with. And we're right now at the red circle. Maybe you can just use your pointer to show everybody right there at the red circle for our second round of workshops. And then we're aiming to present to Council on June the 21st with everything that we've learned. We can go to the next slide. So to remind everybody where we are in the world of Markdale, we're focusing on the municipally owned properties, the 2 properties outlined in red on either side of Toronto Street. We go to the next slide, shows those parcels in a bit more context. So now you're seeing the 5 and 10 minute walk. You're seeing most of Markdale. You'll see the municipal buildings down at the south. Some of the development proposals that are overlaid on this plan, which is in the white opaque, which are residential neighborhoods on the south and on the north. You can see the existing school and Chapman's just to get yourselves oriented, and then the 4 corners right bullseye in the slide, and the municipally owned properties are outlined in red again. We go to the next slide. What we talked about at the last session, we set a little bit of context. Always for your orientation, you're going to see the red squares of the municipally owned properties on the slide, and we're showing you now where those sit with respect to other municipal parks and public open space and cemeteries in and around Markdale. And this is really important because you'll see in the drawings that Ying is going to be presenting how we're trying to make connections to the existing sites of open space and parks. Go to the next slide is an inventory of what we understand parking in existing private public parking lots, so off-street parking and on-street parking, and we get in the order of around 130 spaces in and around the 4 corners. Go to the next slide, which maps the heritage buildings that are either designated or listed as having some apparent heritage value. And so you can see there's quite inventory of buildings close to our properties. So the next slide is a summary of what we've done so far. So many of you on the call, just having a look at my list of participants, joined us for the first round of workshops, which were on May 6th. We had 2 sessions, about 60 people joined in total, and those workshop recordings were posted to the project webpage. We prepared a poster, you see on this slide, and the municipality did a terrific job getting those distributed around town so that people could then get the link to the online survey. So we had our online survey from the end of May to the middle of June, and we had 315 participants, which was fantastic. When I did a quick scan of some of the metrics in the survey, 34% of the respondents were over 50. 63% were between 20 and 50. So that was really great for us because we thought we got a good broad range of different age groups. 83% were full-time residents. 73% of the people that answered the survey were within a 10-minute drive. 75% of the people answering the survey come to Markdale to visit a business, and over 50% come to Markdale at least a couple of times a week. We go to the next slide. At the I'm going to go back to the workshop, and then I'll summarize some of the results of the survey. At both of the sessions at the workshop, we asked people from your own perspective, what were some of the ingredients for a successful, healthy, and thriving town center? And then we also asked for some examples of healthy, thriving town centers that people wanted to share with us. And so the block in the gold on the side are the examples of other communities that people shared with us. And then down the side in bullet points are what people told us were important to contribute to a thriving, healthy community. And so with things like small, interesting stores and green space and having community space and having good wayfinding and maybe public art, and maybe games tables, people said move the town hall downtown. Lots of people talked about the importance of having people living and working close to the center. Then the next slide, we asked people at the two sessions of the workshop, what's the single biggest obstacle to change, and what are the single biggest opportunities for change? And so on the left, below the plus sign, what's some of those opportunities for change? Housing, mix of businesses, ecologically friendly streetscape, space for artists, moving the library downtown, moving the town hall downtown, don't move the town hall downtown, having a performing arts facility. I thought this was a great suggestion that somebody made at the very bottom of that list of the opportunity for change is people who want change, and the corollary on the negative is people who don't want change. And I thought that was a very interesting contribution to the conversation. Then in the next slide, we put up the workshop drawing that's in small down the side. And then we asked people for input on the drawing. And people talked about things like thinking about a better location for the beer store and having bike parking areas. And people wanted to know the projections for population in Markdale. How would we be able to support additional businesses? Had a great conversation about location for the Pennywise shop. People talked about the need for on-street parking, and the yellow and pink on that drawing were some of the drawings, some of the recordings of how we were illustrating what we were hearing at that session. We go to the next slide, and let's share the results of the online survey. So probably many of you on the call completed this survey, and one of the questions was about the general agreeing level of support for the overall drawings. And we had three different drawings. One was the overall framework plan that Wai Ying's going to walk you through as a reminder. And we had 92% of the survey respondents gave it a 3-star rating or higher. Then we'll be zeroed in on the municipally owned properties. Almost 80% of the survey respondents gave the concept as we presented it in May, a 3-star rating or higher. And then again, about 80% of the respondents gave when we pushed out from the municipally owned property and looked at some of the long-term development opportunity of the land surrounding, if and when the owners wish to do so. Again, about 80% gave the plan a 3-star rating or higher. Then we go to the next slide. We asked survey respondents what is needed to revitalize Markdale, and we gave a suite of 8 different items, and we asked people to drag the top 3 items above a bar. And the top 3 items were mix of shops and services, options for housing, and getting more people living downtown. So clearly, we took a pretty strong preference from people completing the survey to get more people living in downtown Markdale, in part to help support the shops and services. And then we had a number of images that related to the images that we presented in May. And we wanted to know generally, do you agree with a thumbs up or disagree with a thumbs down to those images? And this is a snapshot of the responses. So buildings that frame the street, almost 70%. A variety of housing, 67%. Enhanced streetscaping, 79%. Buildings that frame the public open space, 84% agree. Having a village square somewhere close to the town center, 87%. Enhancing the landscape character and overall character of Toronto Street, 83%. Having development with ground floor active uses, and that means commercial uses, shops, services, restaurants, anything that brings activity along the ground floor of those buildings. Having a downtown focus, 90%. Enhanced wayfinding and signage, 73%. A sense of place year-round, 84%. Pedestrian-friendly streets, 83%. And more on-street parking, 64%. So generally, with the results of the thumbs up, thumbs down, you agree or disagree with all the images we shared, we took relatively strong support for the direction we were presenting. So the next slide, a reminder, and then I'm going to turn it over to Wai Ying. Oh, sorry, I forgot I added a couple of slides. We know that the town completed a parking survey for a number of the centers in Grey Highlands. And this is the results from the survey specific to Markdale. There were 88 respondents. And I just pulled out a couple of the survey results from that summary, that 88% of the respondents said that they find parking within an acceptable walking distance. 44% said they rarely have difficulty finding on-street parking. It's most difficult to find parking on weekends, which probably isn't a surprise to anybody on the call. Most find parking convenient and easy to find. Most have been able to find parking and able to patronize a business. But then at the end, most people feel that there's not enough parking and that it's not well signed. We also were happy to come upon the next slide, which is a Facebook group talking specifically about redevelopment of the municipally owned sites. And so we're really interested to understand the images that were being shared in that Facebook group. And I think I checked today, there was over 100 members of that group. And so what we were interested to see when we were looking at the images is that we thought that there were a lot of commonalities with the approach of the Facebook group and our approach to the site. And that's with respect to the location of buildings that frame the public open space and give some face to Toronto Street. And the notion that the building facades are really well articulated with windows and doors to have lots of eyes on both the park and the street and lots of activity, especially on the ground floor. And we see lots of detail being shared about the character and form of that urban square on Toronto Street. Go to the next slide. And then I'll hand it over to Wai Ying after this one to remind everyone that the principles that we were using as the foundation of our approach, that there's a mix of houses, housing magnet for people, that it's walkable, the plan, that it absolutely builds on the rural agricultural heritage character, that there's green space, and that development is being illustrated that is compatible to the form and character of the building in downtown Markdale. So Wai Ying, I'm going to hand it over to you now to walk through the plans and the images.
Yeah, so the first couple of plans, some of you on the call today will recognize. So we presented this diagram in the first workshop. You'll remember it was meant to clearly illustrate the importance of the downtown as the central core of the community. What the diagram is also illustrating is where the downtown sits within the broader context of the community and in relation to the existing natural features and the rail trail, as well as the main crossroads. Just to remind you, what it does propose is an organizational structure that uses these existing features to frame the community. And it proposes the development of key elements to reinforce connectivity and character and identity, to make movements through the community easier, safer, and more enjoyable. It's meant to highlight special places, locations, and destinations. And it's meant to promote unifying and linking elements that stitch the many parts of the community together. So just to remind you, in conjunction with the 6 principles on the previous slide, this is the context in which the downtown and the subject lands have been considered. We presented 3 development scenarios focused primarily on the lands owned by the municipality, highlighted in red. The 3 scenarios are based on the development of mixed-use buildings on both sites and a public space on the west side. The first scenario here shows a series of buildings arranged to frame the streets and the new public space, as well as an increase in height to approximately 4 stories. As with all scenarios, this one shows the desire to create strong east-west connections in the form of pedestrian walkways and landscaped mews. Scenario 2 is essentially the same as scenario 1, except here we showed the possibility of combining the corner sites with their adjacent neighbors to create larger development parcels. In so doing, this would create the opportunity for more robust landmark buildings in these prominent key locations. We had also suggested in this scenario to increase the building heights from approximately 3 to 6 stories as an option. We showed a third scenario, which was essentially the what if scenario if the downtown were to be built out in the future. So the same principles of mixed use buildings, strong pedestrian connections, streets that frame the street, buildings that frame the streets were extended to other parts of the downtown beyond the municipally owned sites. And so what we looked at were underutilized sites that had buildings that were less than 3 stories, sites that had a form of development that was primarily large surface parking areas out front along the street, as well as sites that were known to be potential development sites. Because scenario 3 embodied the principles and full spectrum of possibilities for the downtown, we used it as a basis to further explore and refine the 6 big moves inherent to all the scenarios. Here they are again to refresh your memory. These moves encompass directions for buildings, streetscapes, and public spaces. So on the next several slides, we'll look at how these apply to the vision for downtown, and I'll highlight the key features that have changed or are new to the scenarios since the first workshop. Okay, so this first diagram highlights streets and walkways as one of the big moves. So in addition to the east-west mid-block connection that you saw previously connecting Isla Street to King Edward Park, it is also showing these things. First, an idea for a Woolnerf on the south side of Fire and Ice, the restaurant where the fire station building is located. The Woolnerf would have special paving and landscaping where space permits to make it look and feel less of a driveway and more as a courtyard environment, while still allowing vehicular access. The other thing that it is showing that if and when the development of the adjacent municipal site occurs, and if there is the potential to arrange for access from Main Street instead of Toronto Street, the Woolnerf condition could be transformed into a fully pedestrian and landscape space. The second thing this is showing is that Toronto Street is reimagined with bump outs and lay-by parking, reducing the appearance of the travel lanes and creating more space for street trees and landscaping from south of Main all the way up to Cavan. The third thing it's showing is a pedestrian crossing at the mid-block connection across Toronto Street here, a combination of bump outs on either side, special pavement markings within the roadway, as well as special pavement above the curb, along with signage, will provide a safer and more direct pedestrian access across Toronto Street. For these same reasons that I just mentioned, a similar bump outs and pavement treatments are suggested along Main Street. Here, the existing buildings are located close to the street, so longer bump outs will create the opportunity for more street tree planting and seating areas. For existing buildings, a set of guidelines will help to coordinate improvements as they occur. The guidelines would address fairly typical elements found in other CIPs, community improvement plans in other communities. These are listed on the side, if you can see that. So under guidelines, we would look at things like shop front signage, shop front awnings and canopies, facade materials, colors, architectural expressions, and then of course, building sides where murals and public art opportunities exist. That's for existing buildings. So for new development, it's important to consider setbacks as they relate to creating spill out areas in front, but also in relation to the existing street wall. So for instance, an additional, I'm going to throw out a number, an additional 0.5 or 1 meter setback may not be discernible along the street as a street wall condition, but it would add significantly to the existing sidewalk to create a more generous pedestrian realm. So on this next slide, in terms of buildings and uses, we presented scenarios that included for mixed use buildings along Toronto main streets. The mixed use buildings provide the opportunity for non-residential uses in the ground floor, as Donna mentioned, and it adds to potentially the retail environment of the downtown. However, we appreciate that the vitality of the existing downtown may not necessarily be enhanced, could be enhanced by other uses that may not necessarily be retail. So all of the buildings that are shown with dark pink base color around the edges, these buildings and these ground floors may accommodate a variety of different uses. These are listed on the right-hand side of the slide. We heard from the community that having more people living downtown as well is not only important, but essential to the life of the downtown. Based on all of the colored buildings in the diagram, we did a very high-level quantification of the units potentially created in this scenario. So given a range of 2 to 3 stories, primarily residential in form, around the edge of the downtown, and then a 4 to 6 story mixed use building scenario concentrated along Toronto Street, we estimated about 2,000 to 3,000 square meters of non-residential space. So that's all the ground floor areas that you see on the plan. And then we also estimated approximately 150 to 200 residential units on all of the above ground floor stories, based on an average unit size of about 90 square meters. And that would give you a 1 to 2 bedroom scenario. So with the scenario, a combination of parking options were also being recommended. So it includes at-grade parking located behind buildings. So where there's surface parking lots, we'd want them located behind buildings. It's also identifying lay-by parking or on-street parking along all streets that are located within the 10-minute walking radius of the center. And you saw in the earlier diagram where we had those circles identified. And that center, the focus of the center being the intersection of Toronto and Main Streets. We're recommending that as part of all of the options for parking, that structured parking above or below grade, depending on the size of the development site, as well as access and economic feasibility, should be on the table. And then lastly, any existing parking on public sites, such as the King Edward Park, where the community center is located, should be added to the mix.
So that image just to show some options for buildings that are beyond 4 stories, that still have the characteristic mixed uses along the ground floor, and buildings that are framing the public space in particular, and showing the variation in building height in particular.
Thanks, Donna. Okay, so then on this last diagram, what are some of the key considerations that we need to think about? So the existing zoning already allows for buildings that are 11 meters tall, and this allows for approximately 2-story buildings with pitched roofs or 3-story buildings with flat roofs. The question is, given this context, how much development has occurred in the downtown in recent years. The purpose of the visioning exercise is really to set a guiding framework for the development of the downtown that will revitalize private and public properties. So within this context, we need to think about how to position the downtown and the municipally owned sites to spur interest and redevelopment. The municipally owned properties offer the greatest opportunity actually to catalyze this change while also achieving the broader community building goals that we've described, such as building a better enhanced public realm, as well as enhanced connectivity, pedestrian connections. So the other thing that I wanted to remind everybody with this diagram too is that the renderings that we've presented are not architectural, right? It's conceptual scenarios to demonstrate key principles and objectives, the ones that we've described so far. So while we have heard that the preference or tolerance for buildings through the survey and all of the meetings and input that we received from the workshops is around 6 stories, and that is what we've depicted, we know that the industry's tolerance hovers around the 8-story mark, where surface parking starts to move into structures and free up at-grade space for things such as public space and beautiful streetscapes. So these elements are as important as the buildings themselves, if not more so, to the vitality of the character and ultimately the success of the downtown. On the next several slides, we're going to share 3-dimensional images of what this emerging image could look like. So with this first one, buildings on the municipal properties are shown in orange, and other buildings outside of those properties are shown in yellow. This view is from the southwest, and it clearly shows the transition of 2- and 3-story residential buildings east and west of Toronto Street, and then transitioning to 4- and 6-story mixed-use buildings focused along Toronto Street.
I think it's also important, Wai-Ying, that we just make mention of why we're showing a building in the corner at the corner of Toronto and Main, as opposed to extending the open space down to that corner. That we are trying to reinvigorate the 4 corners with building instead of open space.
Absolutely. Thanks for reminding me. So we are along Main Street, filling in the gaps, for instance, and trying to create landmarks that mark the 4 corners as important places. And I think in a later slide, when I do get into a little bit more of the detail of the urban square that we're proposing, we'll talk about it again and what the qualities of the space is.
And the image about, I can't remember if you mentioned about the bank on the corner.
Yeah, and so the bank on the corner on the east side of Toronto Street, where that gray portion is shown extending beyond the corner, that is intended to show the possibility of maintaining the facade in part, or the building in whole, and integrated into any new development form that might occur on that corner. So there is the potential to do that. The other thing I wanted to highlight here as well is that we've highlighted in red all the ground floors of all of the buildings existing and future buildings where we anticipate those active non-residential uses as part of that streetscape.
Okay. Good to go to the next one.
Yeah. I'm clicking between 2 screens. So this view is from the southeast, gives you yet another clear view of the new public square that has a strong presence and visibility along that public street frontage. It's also showing that while the physical edge of the square may be Toronto Street, the buildings on the east side of the street also play a very important role in framing and defining that perceived space or center of the downtown. This third and last view is taken from the west and shows the strong east-west connection that extends Isla Street in the foreground to King Edward Park in the background as a landscaped pedestrian link that's framed by buildings that open onto it. And then in terms of the urban square itself, some of the feedback related to its location and size, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that. There was a suggestion that it be moved inboard on the site, and another suggestion was made that it was perhaps too small in size. So when we tested these things, this is what we discovered. So the public spaces are generally more successful when they have visibility or high visibility and prominence on a public street. So that's why it's located along Toronto with the frontage that it has. It's approximately 55 meters of street frontage. The other thing that we looked at was that if the park were to be shifted west into the backside of the site, one of its primary frontages would then be the backside of the shops on Main Street. So not the most attractive nor desirable condition to animate the space. We also looked at some stats. So on the right-hand side, you'll see some statistics that we provided in terms of the area, 1,300 square meters or 0.32 acres for the park public space in total, as well as I mentioned, the 55 meters of frontage on Toronto. Yeah. And then when we look at that area, it approximately accommodates 150 to 250 persons using the space while whether standing or seated. So for reference, this size that we're showing here, it represents the presentation when it's done, and we'll 3.5 times the size of the existing temporary space at the corner of Toronto and Main. It's similar in size to, just for those on the call who may be familiar, it's similar in size to the public space outside of Kitchener City Hall, and it's similar in size to Waterloo Square on King Street, which is the main commercial downtown in Waterloo. And it's larger than the downtown square in Oakville, which measures only 1,000 square meters, which is the picture shown in the upper left-hand image. So on the next several slides, these renderings you saw in the last workshop that we presented. So the possibilities for what that might look like, the existing condition, and then how would it look at some point, future point in time with the buildings developed out on the corner, as well as in the background, you can see the other building on the other side of the potential new urban square. Excuse me. A view from Toronto Street looking at the existing site towards the west, what it looks like today as a parking lot, and then what it might look like at some point in future with that pedestrian muse, landscaped buildings that frame that passage, buildings that have shop fronts and windows and doors that spill out and open onto that new urban space. And then we have a new addition to the renderings. We took a look at that, the pedestrian muse, the Wooner or potential pedestrian muse in the long term in the space between the fire and ice and the adjacent building. So this is what that looks like today, and then reimagined at some point in future as a pedestrian place where the patio, restaurant patio could spill out. There's room and space for landscaping, as well as a pavement treatment that ties it together with the streetscape along Toronto Street. And then I'm going to skip over this one and just quickly go through this slide that I have in here to let everyone know, if they don't already know, that in addition to this work that we're undertaking, the municipality is also undertaking other work that may be informed by some of these outcomes. So for instance, under the official plan, the municipality with this work may choose to enhance their existing policies for urban design guidelines, urban centers, and the downtown with language to address the desired character, form, scale, and aesthetics of the downtown. And similarly, any updates to the provisions in the existing zoning bylaw could provide another level of specificity to development form and scale in the downtown that will help to achieve the desired character and aesthetics. And you can see under zoning bylaw that I've identified one area where specifically the zoning that prevails on the existing hospital site might want to be changed so that it's consistent with all of the rest of the downtown commercial zoning. And then on that note, I'm going to end this part of the presentation, hand it back over to Donna. You let me know if you want to go back to the
Just go to the next slide.
Next, okay.
Just for a minute, and then we'll go back to the plan and leave that up.
Okay.
So we are, as mentioned in the beginning, we are anticipating a council presentation on July 21st. We are putting together a report that summarizes the process, the plan, the guidelines to direct interest from the private sector. And then that's when a whole other process will unfold to seek out interest from the private sector, exactly what it says, in developing the site. And hopefully the municipality may have many different offers that they can review and consider. Like always, we're posting everything to the project webpage, and like always, get your comments in to ECDEV at Grey Highlands. With that, let's go back to the drawing, the plan that you had up, that one. Let's just leave that on the screen. And what I'd like to do is I'm going to go down through my list of participants and just call your name out. We've got about 18 people on the call, and we've got about 45 minutes. And just invite you to turn your mic and your camera on if you'd like, and to share comments on the plan that's on the screen now. So sometimes I have a phone number, so I'll just call out the last 4 digits of your phone number. So the first on my list, I have 0732. So I'll just give you a minute. And if you're phoning in, it's hi. No, it's hard that you haven't been able to see the images we're sharing on the screen, but go ahead.
No worries at all. My internet was just not strong enough. So this is Deputy Mayor. I'm just here to listen in on the comments.
Okay. Thanks so much for calling in and listening, and you'll hear the conversation as well. Next, I have Barbara.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. Everything's good, Barbara.
Okay. Well, generally, I like your plan. I think we need lots of accommodation spaces, so I really don't have a problem with seeing 6-story apartment buildings. I like the idea of plantings and pollinator plants and lots of trees and shade for people to sit underneath. And I like the idea of interactive art and play spaces. I really think the architecture should fit in with the old buildings that are existing in Markdale.
Yeah.
I really don't like it when I see a modern building sitting in the middle of a block of old buildings.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering if we should think about a truck bypass, because we have a lot of truck traffic, and a lot of the trucks turn at the main corner of Toronto and Main Street, and it might be difficult for them to get around there if there's a lot of trees on the street. I don't really know.
Okay.
And I'm just wondering about the TD bank. Is the parking still going to be there with all if there's like the
redevelopment near the bank?
Yes.
So the drawing that you're seeing on the screen now, you'll see some lines along the roadway. You're not sure if you can point to it because I think you have control of the screen. Or can you see
so all of this?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
So the on-street parking that's there today is being maintained. There's some bits of on-street parking that are currently identified along Toronto Street as well. So any on-street parking that's there today is not intended to be removed. If you're talking about the parking that's on the TD site where my cursor is,
Yeah.
Some of that will be maintained
Okay.
if we can show an access here, but some of it will have to be removed or replaced elsewhere for the redevelopment of this building to occur.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Barbara, just to your point about the architecture should fit, I absolutely agree. We will be writing some, giving some direction about architecture in the work that we do. And I noticed that was also in the Facebook group. There was quite a conversation about the shape of windows on Main Street buildings. Right. So you're right, it is really important to make sure that development is compatible, which doesn't mean that it's necessarily exactly the same, but that it's compatible.
Right. Okay. I think that's all I have to say.
Okay. Thanks, Barbara.
Thank you.
Next on my list, I have Betty. Again, you don't have to turn your mics on. I'm happy to have people here and listen to the conversation. So Betty, go ahead.
Yes. A couple of things that I notice with the screen that you have up now.
Yeah.
Is that it looks like the current hospital lands on the left there are, yes, being considered for residential and on-street businesses, or is it all residential there? What the plan is?
We're showing the potential to redevelop that site once it moves over to the new site as residential currently in this plan. There's nothing to say that because of the zoning that's provided right now in the downtown, there's nothing to say that there couldn't be commercial in the ground floor. What we heard though, when we went out to speak to people and local business owners is that there is quite a bit of retail commercial as it is on Main Street. With the addition of what we're showing up along Toronto Street, we thought that that would be a significant increase already to what's there today. So we were thinking that this site could be potentially the transition from the retail commercial uses to the residential neighborhoods to the west. That was the intent.
Okay, what I see in the corner, the part that's right along Toronto Street. Two buildings that are white, small white buildings to the left of the hospital grounds.
Oh, these ones.
Yes, that's the current location of the Pennywise shop.
Okay.
Just so you know.
Okay.
I don't really have anything else to say really about Pennywise, except that it looks like it stays outside of your design for the residential transition. The other question I have, which is about Chapman's and the ice cream museum. I haven't heard you say anything about having a location for that in the downtown area. And the question I would ask is, has any thought been made with Chapman's to discuss the unused Chapman's property where the original buildings were when it burned down? That spot is all vacant and not in use at the moment.
Yeah, we've had a great conversation with a representative from Chapman's, and we talked specifically about the ice cream museum as one of the ideas. We haven't pursued specific redevelopment opportunities for their properties. And in terms of the ice cream museum, there were other locations that were talked about, that as a possibility, other locations in Markdale in addition to this location. But yeah, we haven't. Wayne, do you want to weigh in on redevelopment opportunities?
Yeah, so I'm just going to point to some of these rose-colored areas that surround the buildings, along the new buildings along Toronto Street. And I think any one of these buildings could potentially house a ice cream museum if and when that were ever to take place. You'll notice that in one of the earlier slides, I had listed a whole bunch of other non-residential uses that could go into these red ground floor areas, and that included things like galleries and maker space and community uses. And Absolutely, the library, any other kind of public building could, public use could go into any one of these building bases and provide a contribution or an animated use to this new public square and streetscape. So it's accounted for. That whole long list of opportunities are accounted for in these building forms.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks, Betty. And next up I have Darren. And then Hannah, you're after Darren if you want to get queued up. So Darren, I'll just wait to see if your mic comes on. There you go, Darren. Go ahead.
How you doing?
Good.
Can you hear me okay?
We can. It's great. Yep, all good.
So I'm the fellow who started the Facebook group.
Yep.
And so one of the main concerns I had when I looked at the video the first time around was the fact that everything looked very much like an apartment block that we would see in Toronto. I moved up here from the city to get away from that kind of thing. I'm liking in the new version here that you've added some more setback and whatnot. The only concern I still have is going 6 stories plus.
Yeah.
Being again, being a rural town, we do need community spaces to gather. But at the same time, do we want to turn our downtown into a giant apartment block? And that's my real concern.
A giant parking block? Is that what you're saying?
No, apartment.
Oh, apartment block. Yeah, I hear you.
I do understand that we need to convince developers to do what they need to do here. But I do believe, like one example, we don't have fire equipment to handle fires above 3 floors. Is that something the developer would pay for, or are taxpayers going to pay that money so that the developers can build more apartments? Those kind of things come into play.
Okay, fair enough. So what you're seeing on the drawing, so we're not depicting architecture, we're depicting building footprints. And in the world of planning, there's not many land uses to choose from. There's commercial uses, there's residential, there's institutional, there's open space. We heard loud and clear from the survey responses and from the last workshops that people are looking to provide more opportunities for housing in Markdale. So we're trying to show on this plan where that housing could be provided. They're not all intended to be apartment blocks, as you say. There's a variety. The absolute intention is a mix of building forms with ground contact housing, townhouses, low-rise buildings up to 6 stories. We absolutely understand the sensitivity around 6 stories and above. And what Wai Ying was talking about is what the kinds of things that people that would be interested in redeveloping the site, they're going to be looking for. So we're trying to equip the municipality with the information they need to know when they go out to seek interest from the private sector developer. And even when the municipality gets submissions, they don't have to accept them. Hopefully they're going to get many submissions, a few submissions, and they can evaluate the advantages and disadvantages of each. But what I liked with the work that you were doing on your Facebook page was the focus on the urban square, which we absolutely agree. I loved the way that your buildings were framing that urban square. Absolutely agree. Loved, the forms that you were showing, some long and narrow buildings. So I thought there was a lot of commonalities there too. So, but you're right in saying that there is housing being shown on the demonstration plans, because that's what we heard. And that's what we continually hear when we do work in Grey Highlands, the need for more housing. That's what I heard loud and clear from Mr. Chapman when I had a conversation with him, that they are desperate for housing.
Very good. I had one more thing and I forgot what it was now. The arched windows.
Arched windows, yep, that I recognize. Yeah, you did
If
it.
you take a run around to several surrounding towns, let's Durham, Meaford,
Yeah,
all those towns, you will quickly discover that Markdale is in fact a town full of arches.
yeah,
And I think that's a characteristic that we need to play on. It's we've got at least twice as many arched windows and doors here as anywhere else.
okay. Well, that's something that, Wai-Ying, do you think that that's something that we could identify in the guidelines, building some direction for building? Guidelines recognize the,
I think there's a couple of things here, and that's really useful information for the next stage of development. I think for the visioning plan, which is really setting out a structure for development, it doesn't get into a lot of detail, but it does have the ability to provide recommendation for the town to go off and, I guess, prepare a separate document. I would call it a design guideline document. That isn't a policy that's in their official plan, but something that's quite standalone. We have some experience in, similar towns where, that sensitivity of preserving existing architectural character is one of the objectives. And I think it's a balance of trying to create a document that allows for the preservation of the identified elements. And so someone has to go out and actually identify and then agree on what those elements are, right? And then provide enough guidance in a design document that preserves that character, but does not inhibit innovation and creative design. So that's that tricky balance. So absolutely, the short answer is yes. we can address the arched window characteristics.
I've got 30 years design experience. I know what you're saying.
okay, thanks very much, Darren. Thanks for those comments.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next up I have Hannah and then Kate. So I'll just give Hannah a minute. Mic coming on. There you go, Hannah. Go ahead.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Lovely. Well, yeah, I wasn't able to make it to the first visioning meeting that we had or you guys held.
Yeah.
But just with the updates and looking at things online, I do appreciate the vision, the overarching vision of where we see Markdale going.
Yeah.
I love the idea of incorporating more greenery, incorporating the ideas of walkability and wayfinding and creating public space, because I do feel that Markdale, having grown up here,
Yeah.
Markdale does deserve and almost needs that. Just a couple of things.
Okay.
So you mentioned the park having it, or the town square space, having it on a major street, and that's why you've placed it north of Main Street and solely on Toronto Street.
Yeah.
In my mind, people stop at the lights in Markdale and can see all four corners, but blocking that corner at Main Street West and Toronto Street North with the construction of a building would block that view of the park. Whereas I see if it were to be on two main streets, the Main Street and Toronto Street North, it would open it up so that people could, see it when they're stopping, when they're driving on the highway, because Highway 10 is, as we all know, so busy with people heading north to cottage country.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I understand what you're saying, that there is there could be some merit in dragging the green space out to the corner. So Wai-Ying, I know you got queued up the before and after view from that corner.
Yeah, no, I understand the point, and I don't disagree with the point. I think having that visibility, which is what we're trying to do, onto that main sort of thoroughfare frontage is good. I think one of the other things that we're trying to balance that with as well is that although we want frontage on a main frontage, we also want to bring the scale and speed of that roadway, which you mentioned is a highway, functions as a highway, and everybody kind of zips through it. And so I think visually, closing the street in with vertical elements in the buildings on the both sides helps to create that sense of slowing and traffic calming and enclosure that's so lacking. So, you know, with the addition of the trees and the bump outs, the perceived narrowing of the travel portion of the roadway, and then the perception of the scale with the buildings on the corners in our minds helps to bring the entire quadrant, the entire four corners down to a human scale. So that was what we were trying to balance it against. The other thing too with that was that we really wanted to, as Donna started to say earlier on, provide that kind of landmarking at the most prominent corners. And so we really do have the opportunity, because it's municipally owned on the corner, to do that there in that particular location. Not so much on the adjacent corners where the municipality doesn't own the properties, where there are, you know, existing buildings that are maybe two stories. So here we really want to capitalize on that opportunity to create a landmark building. And I think providing a park in that location is not the building landmarking strategy that we would seek here.
Okay, yeah, I completely agree with the idea of bringing things down to the human scale and encouraging people to slow down. I know that you guys mentioned using the street bump outs, and I think with the development of, you know, 3 to 6 story buildings, either way, that's going to encourage people to slow down. But I completely understand the idea of, you know, having those 4 pillars there. I will stick to my guns though and say that I like the idea of having a glorious green space at a corner that encourages people to stop, that shows people that Markdale isn't just developing into, you know, a Shelburne or an Orangeville or, you know, those other towns that you see along Highway 10.
Yeah, but it has a distinct kind of green identity, green space identity. And I think that's a really important point. That it is green.
Yeah. As I said, I definitely love the idea of incorporating more greenery. And as other people have mentioned before, you know, having the architecture fit the atmosphere. Yeah. And I really think it's important to remember to value the history of the town. You know, you're developing on a site where the FT Hill building used to stand, which was this gorgeous architectural piece that, you know, everybody knows. Everybody who lives in Markdale knows about it. So I think that paying attention to the design elements, and I know that you guys aren't necessarily the people that will be architecturally designing that, but if, you know, moving forward, I think having those.
You know what's interesting, Hannah, is that just in that comment that you made, that you recognize the importance of having a beautiful building on that corner, because that's memorable to you, the beautiful FT Hill building that used to sit on that corner. Really, and that just speaks to, I'm going to have to, just mute that person I just remind everybody to keep an eye on your phones and anyway, Hannah, just to finish the point, that was to what Ying was talking about, creating a landmark at that corner, because just like you say, that is really memorable, that building that used to sit there, and people recognize that as a landmark. Okay, thanks, Hannah, that is terrific. Thank you very much. And I love that you grew up in Markdale. It's really good to get those perspectives.
Thank you
for that. Kate, you're next up on my list.
Thanks, Donna.
There you go.
I appreciate your presentation today. I'm just going to notice that what you have up right now, it seems that the TD Bank has been removed from that image. So,
okay, good. Thank you for that. Let me just have
so something that I want to start out with is just saying that, okay, so I was raised here. I wasn't born here, but I live on the West Back Line. So I used to work for the Markdale Chamber of Commerce, so I have a bit of history with the town and the community development. And we're looking at a town that has basically had a 1,400 population for the last 30, 40, 50, who knows how many years. And we're already, you know, almost doubling in size with the subdivisions that are coming in. And so my concern here is that I keep hearing, and I'm seeing a lot of urban development visioning that is, you know, I see that you're trying to make it as close to fit our rural area. I really see, like I see this, even this image right here, it just reminds me of what you would see when they, you know, they slap up a condo at the corner of King and Dufferin in Toronto or something, right? So I'm not seeing this as necessarily reflecting our unique rural environment. I'm a little concerned that there's seems to be an intent to make this a saleable to developers, especially when you're suggesting that, you know, that they're going to want 8 stories if they want underground parking, that sort of thing. I see that this is really coming in from your perspective and the perspective of the municipality, but I really wonder about what the residents would have said for a visioning process. There was never a residential survey, which is one of the tools that you can use in community improvement plans. And it's my understanding that there was never anything like that where you sort of went door to door to ask people. I think you originally started visioning, I believe your first meeting said that you talked to 14 people, and now you've had 315 people. Population of Grey Highlands is 10,000. So you may have feel that you had a good input, but like, I'm just not feeling that there's a big enough input into what people want to see. I'm curious to see what I haven't seen in any of the meetings, people who actually private landowner owners who own those properties where you are now putting up multi-story buildings onto.
So, okay, so let me just be
commercial.
clear, Kate, that the illustrations, the illustrations of Beyond, well, let's go back to that image. Let's go back to the
Oh, I get that they're just
diagram
concept
for-
drawings. I'm
yeah,
not
I mean,
arguing.
it's just if
providing my opinion.
and when they are ever interested in considering other possibilities for their property, Kate. So I want to make sure everybody on the call knows that we're not, this isn't a construction drawing. We're not forcing anybody to do anything. So then we come back to the town-owned property. Why, can you just go back to the plan? There we go. So then we come back to the town-owned, the municipally owned property. And, you know, we do have to leave the municipality with something that others may be interested in developing. The municipality isn't doing this on their own. And
Well,
so
I understand that.
to
I'm just suggesting that you're offering a rather large visioning process for the future, and have the residents of Grey Highlands actually weighed in on if this is what they want, how they want their town to grow. And I'm not faulting you. You're working on terms of reference from the municipality. I'm actually faulting the municipality in not having enough public input into this entire process. So I'm just providing my opinion at this point.
No, fair enough. So you're right. We have not gone door to door, but
understood. And that's not your role. That would be the role of the municipality through their community improvement plan.
Well, you know, or we could.
Yeah,
we have
again,
done it on other
not-
projects.
not-
But just
not
to be
your
clear, Kate, just to be clear. So we've had 2 workshops each with the 2 sessions and made it and advertised it as broadly
Yes,
as
where
we can.
you've presented things that you have basically based on interviewing 14 people.
No,
And
sorry, no, just
talking
to
with a
be,
few people. So you've basically
Okay.
presented plans that are already almost a fait accompli, in that I see this a lot. I've worked in community development a lot. I see where people see a target at the end and they just want to get to the target at the end. I'm just saying that I think that there could have been more fulsome input, and I'm not faulting you. Okay. So for instance, when you say you talk to Chapman's who needs housing, so what about all the subdivisions that are coming in? Like, are they saying, you know, I understand we want a mix of housing. I get that. It's just a matter of when you quote someone who is so substantial in our community as saying something like that, I think you might want to, you know, I'm just putting in a little bit of context. I think the idea of bump outs on a provincial highway, I'd love to hear what the MTO has to say about that within our connecting link, in that, you know, that's already going to potentially, like, having this, how did you put it, the quadrant at the human scale and the green space identity, and you know, the perceived closing and narrowing of the space going to slow people down. So I think you're potentially creating a traffic nightmare, turning the corner, as Barbara mentioned. You know, it's already a challenge for the 18-wheelers that come in. The town could have long ago given Chapman's access for a road up at A Street into their factory. They didn't at the time. So, you know, I mean, they haven't there hasn't been a long-term vision. I mean, basically the municipality owns land downtown and they're trying to figure out what to do with it. And they're asking people from out of town instead of people from in town. Again, I'm not faulting you. So comparing the square size to Kitchener, Waterloo, Oakville, really? Like, this is another one of my concerns, is that you're basically like, I don't think that Markdale's town square should have any resemblance to anything in Kitchener, Waterloo, or Oakville. I think it should reflect Markdale. So, and I'm curious who's going to animate the square. And again, this is a shot over the bow, I guess, at Municipality of Great Highlands, that, they've redeveloped that square with gravel. They're talking a lot about green space. They've basically put gravel on their property downtown. And I believe that poster board's been there for over a year and it hasn't had a thing put in it. So they have space now that they're not activating. So I'm just curious how that's going to be activated in the future.
Okay.
Just a comment, not to you, so much as for the, and then, all these these are all good ideas. I mean, we all know, anyone who's watched Roger Brooks' video will know all of these are good potential plans for downtowns, and you're talking about a lot of retail space. It seems to me that that Markdale can't fill its existing retail spaces, so I see adding a lot of extra retail space is great idea to have downtowns activated, cafes, lots of action, but who's going to help that? Who does that? Residents do that, and people and groups do that. So where are those groups at the table?
So let me just try and unpack some of the stuff that you're talking about, Kate, and then I'm going to move on to make sure I can hear from the other few that are on the call. Is that I don't want you to get the impression that we made this plan based on 14 people that we talked in the beginning. We made this plan based on what we think is sound planning and design principles. We talked to 14 people, absolutely, in the beginning to get a sense, a pulse, a snapshot of what some of the issues are. We've had 2 workshops, each with 2 sessions to try and make it available to
right. So again, you're following.
Sorry, let me just
no, because you're interrupting me. I'm a resident of this community. And I hear you constantly getting back to people and saying how it is you're following good planning processes. Everybody can, it's like statistics can be used to prove anything. Good planning can be used to prove anything. I only wanted to put my opinion on record, and I'm going to mute now. So you can respond to it all you like.
Thanks, Kate. And so just for the others on the call, the reference to Kitchener, Waterloo, and Oakville squares, it's not because we're replicating the design of those spaces, is to give people a sense of the size, the physical space. So sometimes it's important to think, okay, that green space on the drawing is generally comparable in size to this green space elsewhere. This will be subject to a much more elaborate design process to figure out what goes in it, what kind of activities, who does what kind of facilities are put in there. So but I absolutely take your points, Kate, and made a good record of them. And the conversations that I had with people from Chapman's, he knows the other developments that are planned in Markdale. And I cannot emphasize how many times we've heard from so many people that we've talked to through the workshops and on the online survey that people want more housing. So next up I have Melanie. Melanie, do you want to, and I'll just keep an eye again. You're not, there you go. There's your mic. So, there you go, Melanie.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Hi, so I do appreciate that this is a long-term vision. And I think that the goal or the direction that you were given was to look at these municipally owned properties, and then you're looking at the larger downtown as a whole, and some of these things may or may not happen. Yeah. And it could be built into your presentation on the 21st to council, but I just wanted to raise it here because it's one thing that I've been waiting to hear but haven't really heard yet is kind of the kind of short-term wins or the steps in the interim that we're going to take to invite developers and invite people to want to live downtown. Things like, things that the municipality can do in the next couple of years while we're waiting for developers to be interested. Like, I think it was on that Facebook page too about the gates in Markdale. Like just sign it when you come into town. Yeah, and then, you know, our existing green spaces, what can we do with those or build upon those to make them, you know, make the downtown more inviting? A splash pad, the electric vehicle chargers, a dog park, like all of those things that the municipality could do, you know, not for, obviously money's involved, but, you know, the things that will get that activation going downtown. Those are my only comments.
That's a great suggestion, and we will give some thought to that, because I take your point. What are things that the municipality that can do in the short term, so that when people come, maybe when anybody's interested in thinking about the site comes to Markdale and sees a really fantastic, vibrant, exciting place where that's
because, you know, I don't expect that you're going to present on the 21st and then we're going to have a developer knocking on our door on the 22nd.
Yeah.
So we need a plan in place for the interim and what we can do to help. Or what if a developer doesn't decide to come, kind of what the plan B is.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Melanie, then I have, let me just check where I was. Oh, sorry, I've lost my list. Then I have another Michelle. Sorry. Patty. I can't pronounce your last name. Sorry.
That's okay. It's Patty. How are you today?
There you go. Yeah,
Super.
I'm good.
I very much like that you are looking at a mix of different housing forms.
Okay.
Because I think ideally we need a mix to be able to allow the people that work here to live here, as well as people who are moving from elsewhere, such as folding up their farms and moving into towns. So we do need a mix of things. And I like very much that you're looking at facades so that we can have new buildings that look like some of our older, nicer buildings. We have loads of history books showing things like that, but we all know that builders can make a box and we can front it with anything. So if we have our goal to have it work in with our other buildings, I think it'll really help our flavor come out. I do worry about the 6-story buildings in that it might create some darkness in our downtown cores. Because our buildings are very close to the street, we're very prone to getting some very dark streets in the afternoon. The buildings on the east side of town are already dark. So the taller we make the buildings, the harder it's going to be. And I'd love to see some light studies done before I buy in on 6 stories, but that's just me.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Why, do you have a sense from the way you've distributed buildings and put height now?
And I know it's a trade-off, right? So and I get that, but yeah, that's one of my concerns. Also, mature trees downtown. A lot of the shopkeepers on Main Street had the municipality take the trees out a few years ago because they were blocking their storefronts. So we're going to have to look at taller trees, more expensive, and this sort of thing, or look at different types of green spaces when we get to that point. My other concern is parking, because we're getting rid of some of the the big lots in town. Right across the street, we've got the drugstore, we've got the Fire and Ice, and Melanie, you can tell me for sure, but I have a feeling that between the two of them, they have 25 staff people that need parking every single day. And if we're getting rid of those spots, and there are more of them, then we have to find places for even the workers in our town to be able to work, not just the people that are moving in. So we do need more parking if if the current parking lots are going to be developed.
Yes. Wayne, do you want to just respond to the parking for new development and existing businesses?
I have this slide up here because we did this sort of quick snapshot of, I have to remind everyone on the call too, there's always the option to do nothing and leave it just as it is. Yeah. So the do nothing scenario is kind of what you have today, which is the 2 stories and then half your sites are surface parking lots. So that's the do nothing, status quo, leave it as it is, nothing happens. So in order to sort of bump it up to that next level, and we're not pro developer, we're not like, we're not trying to create a scenario where we're getting a lot of density. We're trying to find that really fine balance, because it's always a balancing act between what is it going to take for the form of development that's been happening in Markdale that hasn't really been happening really? Yes. What is it going to take for that form of development to change so that you're getting more people? And so, yes, absolutely. In order to develop the downtown, we do have to, you know, cover up some of the existing surface parking lots.
Yes.
That's the trade-off. And so presumably in order to take away those parking spots and provide and replace those parking spots somewhere else, we're thinking, you know, that to increase the on-street parking for a broader area within the downtown is part of the solution. Re-looking at some of the existing parking lots, like I mentioned on one of the slides, the parking lot in the park may not be as efficient as it could be. So having another quick look at it, making sure that, you know, the lines are painted properly, they all measure the same, and that we're getting the maximum numbers is another way to get them. And then the other way is to minimize surface parking in some of these development blocks that you see here. I've maintained some behind buildings. But we really do have to throw the structured parking option into the mix, because it's the option that's gonna provide you the most parking underground or above ground in a structure that is out of the way, that isn't seen, doesn't take away from the street life. But with that option, absolutely, it's a cost benefit analysis. And so in here, I did a really quick analysis of some of the other projects that, you know, we're involved in. And so let's see, economics of structured parking. So if you look at an at-grade parking space, you know, there's no structure. All you have to do is pave it and paint some lines. So that's one cost. When you're looking at a structured parking spot, you're going up to 3 or 5 times the cost of a surface parking spot. So that's above ground structure. And then when you go underground, you're dealing with a whole nother set of structural issues, and that goes up to 6 to 8 times the cost of your at-grade parking. So those are the things that need to be thought about when we're talking about parking hand in hand with forms of development. So I don't think we're proposing a preferred solution here. I think all of those things need to be kept in the basket of tools that are offered up to the development industry and within the municipality to see, you know, sort of where that sweet spot is to, you know, achieve the objectives we're trying to achieve here, maintain the parking as you mentioned, but also have some redevelopment. So it's,
absolutely, I am
Okay.
all for redevelopment.
Okay, thanks, Michelle.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Michelle. Stuart, you're next up on my list, and then I have Teresa, and then.
Good afternoon.
There you go. Hi.
Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes, we can. Go ahead, Stuart.
Good. Well, it's been a very interesting discussion. I think you've adapted yourself very nicely and good response to all those questions and things. One of the things that I see in a positive way was that we moved the thinking in a westerly direction, including the potential for the old hospital. Okay, yeah. I like that. Yeah. But I also, though, since it's the core, I like to see the development considerations to move into King Edward Park and the full park, because there is a recreation potential there, and also uniquely as it is, being in a rural community, we do have fall fairs still there. We do have cows and horses and all that that's all in that particular area. We also have a baseball diamond there. So I do think you have to look at that as part of your development. And there is potential, you know, for space in that park for splash pads and recreation, etc. So I think you need to. Also, I would move it right easterly, is right out to where the new school is along Main Street.
Yes. Yep.
The Main Street, we're not sure what's going to happen with the new school, but where the current school is, there's a landscape presentation which leaves the current building kind of like a question mark. Are they going to tear it down? Are they going to do something with it? Are they going to sell it off? Are they going to sever it? So I think you need to have that as part of the consideration. All right.
Okay.
And that architectural information is all out there.
Yeah, no, we have that. We have that.
Right.
Okay.
So I do think So, I mean, I would take my pen and I would do it, and I'm move my thing through. I would like, if I was doing it, I'd like to see the consideration for the current, right down to the current the hospital. I think that when I mean, I'm from Toronto, so downtown is downtown. Isn't it isn't a few blocks, okay? And
so yeah, take your point, Stuart. We did try to look at some of those opportunities beyond the four corners in the larger context framework plan. But then we are trying to focus primarily on the municipally owned properties. But
I understand that's a sidebar.
Okay.
If you're doing a vision, let's vision what's out there. It's important. I like the evolution of what's happening, in the center core there. But I do think the boundaries need to be pushed to where they actually are.
Okay.
If you're looking at it for an overall vision, and of course the heart of the vision is the downtown property. That's why the municipality acquired it. So, and they wanted to be able to control it. So anyhow, that's my.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks for that.
All the rest is, is conversation right now.
Okay, thank you very much. Teresa, you're next up.
Hi there.
Hi, Teresa.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for comments. At risk of stirring things up and causing a load of people to moan, I'm wondering if there's any consideration to hotel or resort accommodation in Markdale in order to take pressure off some other areas of our locality that have been overrun during COVID.
Let me just respond to that, Teresa, and then come back, because I'm sure you've got other things you want to share too. Wai Ying, do you want to just talk about when we talk about mixed uses in the orange?
So on this slide, I think an accommodate like a commercial accommodation business could occur in any one of these buildings. So here, whether it's the entire building or if it's a wing of a building or a portion of the building, that could happen even on the municipal sites. In the long term, the buildings on the east side of Toronto Street could also be potentially hotels, accommodations on the upper stories as well. So we've shown them as basically towers at this point. I call them towers, 6-story buildings, but they could be accommodation or they could be residential units. So it can all happen in the downtown in any one of these massings that we've shown. And I think it would be a positive contribution to the downtown.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't think anyone.
That's a great point, Teresa. We should make sure we make that clear.
I think we've had a taste of what might happen, and I think we can manage it in an area of the valley of Markdale and the Prairie Highlands that actually wants more business.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Teresa. Last person on my list is Tim. I'll give you a minute in case you want to turn your mic on and not seeing your mic come on. It's just coming up on 2:30, but we are happy to stay on. If there are others, cycle back. If there's anybody that wants to turn your mic on and share anything else, or use one of the reactions icons to raise your hands, I'll just give a minute or two to see if there's other comments that anybody wants to share with the group. I'm not seeing. Oh, there's a hand from Hannah. Go ahead, Hannah.
Hi, sorry. I just wanted to also make a note quickly. I messaged both Donna and Wai Ying individually because I didn't want to flood the comments, but a note on the idea of a bypass. I'm not sure, as I wasn't present at the last meeting, I'm not sure if that was something that you guys specifically offered as an option.
We didn't, no,
Okay.
but.
Okay,
go ahead.
I would just like to make a note that in my studies of urban planning, I have seen case studies on bypasses, and they just horribly impact the life and economy of small towns.
Yeah.
Because if it's so good, if the bypass is so good and it's so useful for large transport trucks, why wouldn't it be useful for other people if it's a straightaway heading straight to cottage country? And that would just reduce the amount of traffic heading to our downtown, which is exactly what we need. And I just don't believe that Markdale can function isolated from the traffic of cottage goers or visitors in general. So I just wanted to quickly make that note, just to put that into other people's minds.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you for that. Thanks for that follow-up.
Really
Okay.
great point that Hannah made, actually, and I'm
Yeah.
glad she made that point, because oftentimes we do have this kind of crossroads of parking and traffic versus downtowns, and people do see the concern for the traffic. But if you look at the flip side of that, many other projects that we work with, there's a transportation consultant, Donna, you'll know him, you'll know who he is. But for him, he's saying, parking and traffic is actually a good problem to have. I mean, the whole point of commercial and retail and the life of commercial and retail is having enough foot traffic and car traffic go by your storefronts. So for him, and in other places that we've worked in, having that kind of slowdown of traffic and having all the different forms of movement is actually a real positive to the vitality. So thank you, Hannah, for making that point.
Do you want to stop sharing the screen while you?
Yes. Can.
Okay, that's great. Okay, not seeing anybody else turning mics on. So I do really want to thank everybody that's carved out a bit of time this afternoon to listen in on the presentation. Like I mentioned earlier, both recordings will be posted to the webpage so everybody can listen to the full explanation, Wai-Ying's full explanation of why the plan's looking like it's looking at their leisure. And so please, tell your friends and family to have a look at the project webpage and have a listen of the recording. And then please share any additional thoughts through the email address at ecdev@Grey Highlands. And so with that, I will end the meeting. I'm going to end the recording.